In this video, I'd like to talk about setting your white balance in infrared photography. I've got some examples coming up, but first, let's talk about some misconceptions around setting white balance in infrared photography. One of the questions I see most from newcomers to infrared is, what is the correct setting for white balance? And there is no one right setting for white balance, unlike visible light. White balance and channel mixing can be used to create realistic blue skies, but ultimately, infrared photography is a form of false color imaging. White balance is used to create color separation for better false color processing. Ultimately, it's about creativity. Another question that I see frequently is, do I need to set the white balance in camera? And you certainly can, but I find that it's faster and more flexible to be able to set the white balance in post-processing, where I have a lot more choices. Another question that I see is, should I always white balance on grass or foliage? And typically that is good if you're shooting 720 nanometer. You'll get good results, but that's not great for other cutoffs like 590 nanometer or 665 nanometer. If you're shooting 800 nanometer or higher, then white balance will have a minor impact on contrast, but you're typically shooting for black and white, so there's less of a need to do any kind of channel mixing. Typically, it's preferred to shoot in RAW, which will give you the most latitude when it comes to setting a white balance, but this image was shot in JPEG, and I can still use the white balance picker and select different parts of the image to create a good separation between the different colors. So RAW is preferred, but JPEG is okay. For these examples, I'll be using Adobe Lightroom, which does require a custom profile in order to allow me to set the correct white balance. I'll link to a video that you can use to create your own custom profile to use in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. If you're using another program such as Darkroom or Raw Therapy, which are great for infrared, they do not require a custom profile. So let's dive into some examples and look at different ways to use the color picker to set your white balance. I can quickly get to the color picker with the W key, which will pick it up, and then I can pick a neutral target. Clouds are my favorite target because they tend to create a good separation between the sky and foliage. In this example, I could do the sky, but I could also use the bark on the tree, which I think will create a pretty good separation. Bark is a great subject for your picker to get that color separation. It's going to create more of the neutral color that allows your skies to really stand out separate from the foliage. In some cases, you might get different results from bark in the shade versus hitting the highlights on the bark, so you may need to experiment to get the good separation that you'd like. So I could try the bark in the shade here, or I could shoot for the grass in this case. That creates some good separation between the sky and the foliage. When you have overcast or dark conditions, you might struggle to get the same kind of separation, that you won't get the same vivid colors as you do when you're shooting in full daylight, but you can still play around with your picker to find a spot that will get you some separation between your foliage and the rest of the image. Here's another dark, overcast day, but I can still create enough separation so that the foliage really stands out in contrast. Sometimes you're not going to have any sky in your image at all. You can use your white balance to create a really sharp separation between the subject and the background. So in this case, this foliage I want to really pop, and I can select the rocks to be more of a neutral color to create that separation. Here's another case where rocks are going to provide a good source of picking to create separation between the foliage and the sky. Granite, another great choice, but I can select rocks in the foreground, or I could select trees. You can play around a bit to find the separation that you like the best. I've got lots of options here. I could go for the surf, which will make the surf bright white. I could also look at the sidewalk, different colors on the sidewalk, or the road. That looks like it's going to give me more of an even blend. A little bit of clouds here, but there may not be enough to create what I need. I've also got some umbrellas here that I can pick from to create a nice distinct separation, in this case from the water, the sky, and then the foliage along the strip here. Another example of an image that has some white in, so I could use the white painted on the road to create separation. I could use the road itself, pick from that, or I could pick from elements within the image. So this white structure could create a good sense of separation as well. These buildings, I can use my white balance picker on the buildings or on the signage or on the street. Lots of good choices to create the separation you'd like here. In this image, I'll try the water tower here. I've also got this building. They're going to be pretty close. So a lot of different neutral colors that I can look at and pick any of these neutral colors to try to get the separation that I'm looking for. In this case, I've got these birds that are going to be white. I could select them, or I could select parts of the building. And then if I'd like, I could play with these colors as well to tweak this a bit. Another good example of multiple potential targets. The ground is a really good source in this image, but I've also got a lot of wood, which I could use to select. A thing to remember here is that the brighter, the more vivid the sky will be in an orange, the more blue you will get in the sky if you're doing a channel swap. So if I really want to accentuate that, I could tweak this a little bit to lean it towards the blue if I wanted a really bright blue sky after a channel swap. If I wanted more of a subdued, soft color blue, then I could lean back towards the other color, which will the softer orange tones will result in a softer blue afterwards, and the brighter blue foliage will result in a more vivid colored foliage after a channel swap. Here I've got the metal structure that I can focus on. That's going to give me a pretty good white balance. I've also got some clouds and some signage, so lots of things that you could pick from. This is an interior shot, so I'm not going to see a blue sky, but I could select this metal, which will create some good separation between the neutral colors of the ground and the furniture from the background, or I could pick the floor. These are both going to create some good separation. Another interior image, this white marble could be selected. I could select the shadows, or I could select the highlights, and each one is going to give me a different look. I could also pick elements in the background and try to find just the look I want, or I could even pick the skylight to create a stronger color here, but a more neutral sky tone. In this image, I could select the metal grate, which is going to push everything to the blue side, or I could pick the wood along the railing here, which will create a little bit more separation between the foliage and the tree trunks and still allow this metal grate to really stand out. One of my favorite targets for setting white balance in infrared is actually dirt or mud. In this case, that's the most neutral element that I'm looking for, and you can see it creates a really nice separation between a sky color and the blue foliage on the ground. You can also, in this image, pick the wood, which will give you slightly different tints. So lots of different options here. Another subdued image without a bright sky, so in this case I'll go for the bench. The path would give you a similar color, but you could also look at the tree trunk and try to pick one of the colors in here to get a good separation as well. This is an easy one. You've got a nice big white building. You could also try the white balancing on the clouds or the fence. They're all going to be pretty close here. When setting a white balance on an infrared portrait, you can use your picker to point to the eye to give you a nice separation of color. There's only so much you can do with a subject like this, but you take what you can get. So just to recap, remember there is no one right value for infrared. There's lots of different subjects and parts of the image you can click on to find the value. Ultimately, what you're striving for is to create that color separation so that when you do false processing, you'll get the best results, because remember, ultimately, it's all about creativity. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.